Yay!
Yu-Gi-Oh! Duelists have always had to deal with the intricacies of preparing for every new physical product release, whether that is studying for the incoming matchups, adding some of the new cards into their own strategies, or simply wailing on the entire thing in an attempt to collect the entire set. But what if I told you that there is a format that has existed since at least May 3rd, 2005 that allows you to collect every single card within its rule set for less than $10? Allow me to introduce you to the Duel Monsters Labyrinth battle game, an add-on from the 4th issue of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Duelist manga, appearing directly after the conclusion of Chapter 37, falls deep in the tag duel between Team Yugioh and Team Paradox. This is a free, infinitely copyable game created by Kazuki Takahashi that is an interpretation of the Labyrinth Duel game variant of base Duel Monsters. But what even in the freaking heck am I talking about? Allow me to explain. In the Duelist Kingdom arc of the anime and manga, Yuki and Joey find themselves challenged to a duel by the Labyrinth brothers Para and Dox, player killers hired to destroy weak duelists by Maximilian Pegasus. Given that Yuki and company were currently trapped underneath a Duelist Kingdom, with the only way out of their predicament seemingly being the path guarded by the dastardly duo in front of them, they had no choice but to accept the challenge or face wandering through the tunnels endlessly until they starved to death. When the tag duel begins, one of the brothers' opening moves is to play the Labyrinth Wall card, which, in typical early Yu-Gi-Oh! Fashion, functions completely different from its real-world in-print counterpart. Instead of summoning a stone wall with 3,000 defense points, which would honestly be really funny, let's be completely honest here, the playing field of the game board is instead transferred from its standard 4x5 form to a 9x9 grid containing a seemingly randomly generated maze. With the new playing field came a few new rules to add to the standard Duel Monsters format that the Milky brothers utilized to become fierce opponents for Joey and Yuki's tag team partnership. The first and most important rule is that monsters are now able to essentially free roam the board, with every square on the grid able to host a single monster on top of it. Each monster in the game is able to move a number of spaces into and around the labyrinth equal to or lower than their level. Take the monster Horn Imp, for example. Since it is level 4, it can move up to 4 spaces every time that it is its controller's turn. The higher level the monster, the larger and larger its movement radius is. Monsters on the same team are able to pass over the space currently occupied by another ally, but enemy monsters act as walls that must be punched through if progress through the dungeon is desired. The second main rule is that in order to combat your opponent's monster, your own monster must traditionally need to be bordering the monster that it wishes to combat. This rule is a bit malleable, as there were a few instances of monsters kind of being able to do whatever they wanted as part of the story of the duel, but we'll chalk that up to the Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime abiding by the manga rules of Duel Monsters and move on. The third main rule is that there were a fair few monsters that directly interacted with either the Labyrinth Wall itself or the Labyrinth Maze proper. Shadow Ghoul was able to be fused with the wall to create Wall Shadow, who was able to use the entire labyrinth as a single space, essentially allowing it to be in proximity to attack any monster that it wished to. Jirai Gumo was able to be placed as a trap set directly onto a single tile inside of the maze, activating to attack any monster that stepped over it in an attempt to destroy them, and then becoming a standard roaming monster after surviving combat. Dungeon Worm was able to reside completely underneath the maze, attacking any monster that it wished to as long as it could reach them using a tunnel. Magic users could still send attacks through this hole that it left behind though, as seen when Joey equipped Flame Swordsman with Salamandra and cooked it alive in its own den. Magical Labyrinth was a spell card that re-randomized the Labyrinth setup, which provided Para and Dox more opportunities to split up and attack Yugi and Joey's weaker monsters. And Gate Guardian, which was a combination of Sangha, Suijin, and Kazujin, was able to target any monster that it wished to for combat, by never needing to be within combat range. The fourth and final main rule was that, although the dungeon itself was see-through from the top, it still had a ceiling, cramped corridors, and was considered underground. This meant that monsters that were too large could not fit into the labyrinth, nor could monsters with the ability to fly travel over the dungeon in an attempt to reach the other side of it. The English translation of the anime dub touts this rule as the dungeon being a no-fly zone, which is a very American and incorrect way to describe it. The whole concept of the Labyrinth Duel was that one side of the maze was considered an exit, which was the side that Para and Dox were protecting, while the other side was implied to be within a cave system, which was the side that Yugi and Joey came from. All of these additions to the standard Duel Monsters rules made for an exciting, albeit one-shot duel that never saw this type of experimentation again until we got Duelist of the Roses for the PlayStation 2. Video on that game sometime soon enough, I promise. I'm sure Kazuki Takahashi felt that the idea of a Labyrinth Duel was too good of an idea to simply leave in a single arc, with no way for manga fans to replicate such a thing, and that's why we received 6 pages at the end of Duelist Manga 4 with a complete list of specially created monsters, a unique rule set for players to follow, and a playing board ready to be used for players to do their thing. What you're meant to do is either cut these pages out or lay them flat enough on a printer to copy them onto a couple of pieces of paper. 2 pieces of paper for each side of the playing field, 4 pieces of paper for 2 copies of the roster of tailor-made monsters, and then maybe holding on to the manga or jotting down the rules onto 1 more piece of paper. I need you to understand how thoughtful and generous this is. The writer of this manga was so happy with his own idea that they created an entirely physical version of the game that they just wrote about, messed around with the rules a little bit, and then filled up an entire cast of playable monsters, creating unique artwork for them in the process, and then distributed it completely for free within their manga volume. That's genuinely so amazing, and this is why Kazuki Takahashi is the GOAT. Rest in peace, you legend. I hope my channel can do your work justice. So what exactly are the rules to this Labyrinth battle game, and why are you so darn attractive? Well, I'm not one to leave an easily answerable question up in the air, so let's discuss exactly that. The Labyrinth battle game is intended for 2 players. Both players are allowed to build their lineup of monsters in secret, but I'll bet a drafting system would also make for some good fun. Your deck, as I'm going to call it, can consist of up to 7 monsters. Each monster has a level that goes along with it, and this is what denotes how much space that card takes up in your deck. You must have a deck that consists of a total of 20 total star points. And trust me, you're gonna want to stretch just how many monsters you're able to bring, alongside what power level you're willing to allow each one to be to its absolute maximum. Given that each duelist is presented with their own version of the monster card list to build their deck from, don't worry about picking monsters specifically so that your opponent doesn't have them. This isn't that type of game. When both players have created their decks, any matter of determining turn count is fine, though the manga specifically mentions rock, paper, scissors as the valid option. Both players set up their monsters in the card base section of their side of the map, and the match begins. The turn player is allowed to move up to 3 of their monster cards during each of their turns. Monsters must move the maximum amount of spaces equal to their level count, never below that number. A space can only be occupied by a single monster at a time, and like with the Labyrinth Duel, allies can pass through each other whilst enemy monsters function as blockades. When you finish moving your monster, you can leave it in either attack or defense position, and the relevant combat statistic will be used when engaging in battle with your opponent's monsters. Combat can be initiated when 1 monster from each player is bordering each other's current spaces. Battles are very similar to standard duel monsters, in that if an attacking monster's attack stat is higher than an attack position monster's attack, or a defense position monster's defense points, targets, then that monster is destroyed. If 2 attack position monsters engage in combat with identical attack stats, then both monsters are destroyed. This is where things differ slightly from base rules though. If a defense position monster is attacked and both combatants share the same attack stat, then the defense position monster is destroyed as well. Additionally, the win condition of a Labyrinth battle game has nothing to do with life points, though attacking a defense position monster card with a card that does not have enough attack points to beat over it does not result in any sort of penalty. And now for a really cool addition. If an opponent's monster happens to be in combat range with multiple of your own monsters, then they can gang up on it and combine their attack points into one lump sum. As the Pharaoh states in the English translation of the manga, even if your opponent plays a blue-eyes-white dragon, you can beat it by attacking with 2 cards. And honestly, I'm a huge fan of beating it, so this made me very happy to see. You may have noticed that I have specifically referred to every card in Duel Monsters Labyrinth battle game as monster cards, and that's because no trap, spell, or equip cards exist in the list of cards presented in the manga. This is probably for the best, since the win condition of this mode is simply to be the only player with monsters remaining inside of the dungeon. Including a bunch of traps and spell cards would, in my opinion, detract from the blissful simplicity that this game mode provides. It's not trying to be Duel Monsters exclusively, just its own little free side mode, kind of similar to Card Party and Mario Party 5. I did a video on that. You should watch it. Look at my feet. But what of the monsters? Well, lucky for you, I'm YouTube's #1 yapper. I've not only got opinions on every single one, but I've even grouped them into little categories based on what they do, and we'll give some quick pre-made teams that you can utilize to take the thinking power out of the beginning of the game in order to get right into the action. There are 2 broad categories that I'll be placing every monster card in: non-effect and effect monsters. The titles are pretty self-explanatory. Some monsters just don't have effects. The bottom half of the card will instead simply include the name of their attack that you can scream when obliterating your pathetic opponent's monster. Though do try not to create a scene. The non-effect monsters in ascending order of strength are the Winged Dragon, Guardian of the Fortress, a level 4 monster with 2100 attack and 1500 defense, Curse of Dragon, a level 5 monster with 2200 attack and 1900 defense, the Blackland Fire Dragon, a level 4 monster with 2200 attack and 2000 defense, Guy of the Fierce Knight, a level 5 monster with 2300 attack and 1800 defense, the Red Eyes Black Dragon, a level 6 monster with 2500 attack and 2000 defense, the Dark Magician, a level 5 monster with 2400 attack and 2600 defense, the Summon Skull, a level 5 monster with 2700 attack and 2000 defense, and the Blue Eyes White Dragon, a level 6 monster with 3000 attack and 2500 defense. Something you probably noticed as I've listed these monsters off is that the stats on each one are not at all similar to those of their real-world counterparts. The manga page that lists them even makes sure to tell the readers, note, these cards don't have the same powers as the ones in the story. It's not a big deal, though it does make for some wild comparisons. I never thought I'd see the day that the Blackland Fire Dragon would be stronger than Curse of Dragon. My boy has been putting in tons of work at the gym, and it's finally paying off. So, okay, let's rip off the plaster in one quick motion. Winged Dragon, Guardian of the Fortress, Curse of Dragon, Guy of the Fierce Knight, Red Eyes Black Dragon, and Dark Magician are technically absolute dog shit. The reason for this is that there are other cards that directly outclass them in both stats and usability. Though we haven't mentioned them yet, 4-star effect monster cards like a Celtic Swordsman and Hercules Beetle do substantially more for the exact same deck cost as Winged Dragon, Guardian of the Fortress. Curse of Dragon literally costs a star point more to bring, even though Blackland Fire Dragon has superior combat stats for a cheaper spot in your lineup. The same goes for Guy of the Fierce Knight, Red Eyes Black Dragon, and Dark Magician, being outclassed by Summon Skull, and in the case of Red Eyes, costing cheaper to include for some reason. There's a case to be made for a Dark Magician over a few other cards since their defensive stat is the highest in the game, making them a terrifying wall to contend with. But as you'll see, this game highly favors offensive strategies over defensive ones. Plus, leaving Summon Skull in attack position provides more defensive quality abilities than relying on a defense stat. It's like how using Jirai Gumo or Goblin Attack Force as attack position walls in the TCG's olden days was often better than running things like Giant Soldier of Stone and Prevent Rat. You can just not actually attack with them, and it provides just as much, if not more, protection than a big booty with a middling attack stat. This leaves the Blackland Fire Dragon, Summon Skull, and the Blue Eyes White Dragon as the main viable non-effect monsters. All three are the top of their class in terms of combat statistics, and the Blue Eyes White Dragon touts the highest attack stat in the entire game and will always win battles that are isolated to single combat. They also have outrageous movement, so expect your opponent to set up splinter attacks in an attempt to bring them down. And now we have all of the effect monsters. Out of the 21 monsters present in the base Labyrinth battle game set, 13 of them are effect monsters, which means over half of them don't have a listed attack that you can screech out to scare the hoes. What a shame. Some monster effects are pretty similar to others, so I've created 5 subcategories to get an idea of what each one is trying to accomplish. First off, we have the combat immunity monsters. Gust, a level 2 monster with 1500 attack and 1200 defense, which can't be attacked by 4-star monsters. Brain Slime, a level 3 monster with 1600 attack and 1500 defense, which can't be attacked by 5-star monsters. And Gimmick, a level 3 monster with 1800 attack and 2000 defense, which can't be attacked by 6-star monsters. These are your defensive walls. Rather than relying on defense points to do the heavy lifting, these monsters simply exist as an untouchable to a certain level barrier to prevent certain monsters from going off. Each one has its own varying levels of usability. Gust walls Blackland Fire Dragon, Winged Dragon Guardian of the Fortress, Celtic Swordsman, Hercules Beetle, Barrel Imp, and Killer Needle, roughly 1/4 of the base monster cast of the Labyrinth battle game. Brain Slime walls Curse of Dragon, Guy the Fierce Knight, the Gate Guardian, the Dark Magician, Summon Skull, and technically Dragon Capture Jar too, but that monster doesn't even possess the combat stats to challenge Brain Slime in a battle under any circumstance. And Gimmick quite literally only walls 2 monsters, the Red Eyes Black Dragon and the Blue Eyes White Dragon. By all accounts, Gimmick is just as its name implies, a gimmick monster with one vital role: to pin down your opponent's blue eyes and prevent it from getting to all of the vulnerable monsters hiding behind it. The inclusion of these combat immunity monsters gives some much needed utility to some of the other weaker, less statistically viable cards, letting them be sleeper includes in your deck that could end up indirectly making some of your opponent's card choices basically moot. All 3 of these cards do suffer from a low level, which, although allowing you to include them for cheap, makes them exceedingly prone to being outpaced by the monsters that they are meant to be defending against. Remember, each monster must move spaces equal to their level, meaning that Brain Slime and Gimmick are basically moving at half of the speed that their ideal combat targets are. You will need to move these guys with great caution and forethought. Now we've got the attack growth duo of Hercules Beetle, a level 4 monster with 1900 attack and 2000 defense, and Celtic Swordsman, another level 4 monster with 2300 attack and 2000 defense. Both of these cards have the effect text, "This monster's attack goes up by 200 for each successful attack," making them a late game win condition against an opponent that refuses to move their high attack monsters too frivolously into the dungeon. Celtic Swordsman is obviously leagues better than Hercules Beetle, who need to survive 2 rounds of combat to be on par with them, so if you only want to include one of these cards, go with the Elf over the Beetle, unless you've got something to prove, or you're this guy. If you had visions of repeatedly attacking Gust and infinitely raising your attack stat that way, I'm sorry to say that you cannot do that. Gust is immune to combat with level 4 monsters completely, not simply immune to destruction by combat, so Celtic Swordsman and Hercules Beetle literally cannot engage in a battle with Gust at all. Without a double attack, base Hercules Beetle has 18 targets with which it is able to grind boosts off of.
Whoa.
I'm including attack and defense position stats as different targets, while base Celtic Swordsman has 30 out of 42. Do with this information what you will. After that, we've got the incredibly niche Stun non-effect monsters. These are Killer Needle, a level 4 monster with 1500 attack and defense, which has the effect text, after it attacks an enemy, Killer Needle can't move on the next turn. Mystical Elf, a level 3 monster with 1500 attack and 1800 defense, which has the effect text, any card which attacks Mystical Elf can't move on the next turn, even if it wins. And Dark Eye, a level 3 monster with 1700 attack and 300 defense, which has the effect text, when it attacks a 5-star monster, that monster can't move for 2 turns, even if it wins. Why, yes! Killer Needle is the worst card in the game. I'm so glad that you noticed. I never did say that the stunning effect of these monsters was limited to the opponent's cards, did I? I genuinely think they forgot to include some sort of benefit to Killer Needle, like maybe it was supposed to be able to move at double speed or something in exchange for stunning itself after each attack. Yes, I'm aware that this is a reference to bees losing their stingers after attacking something and then dying. This is not a bee. Definitely a wasp or hornet of some sort, which, by the way, don't lose their stinger after attacking something. My question is, why does this thing cost 4 stars worth of deck space? It literally only has 10 viable targets with weak attacking stats like that. What on earth is this thing even supposed to do? On a less directly negative note, Mystical Elf and Dark Eye have more pronounced and actually usable effects. It's worth noting that Mystical Elf has to be attacked for her ability to go through, while alternatively, Dark Eye must be the aggressor for them to do their thing. I'd also like to mention that Dark Eye's stats are such that it has no viable destruction targets if it attacks any of its effect targets. In other words, if it attacks Curse of Dragon, Summon Skull, Gaia the Fierce Knight, the Gate Guardian, or the Dark Magician while those monsters are in attack position, it will perish while getting its stunning effect off. What's even stranger about this is that the only 5-star monster that you'd really desperately want to slow down, Dragon Capture Jar, is destroyed by Dark Eye in combat anyway. I'm convinced that Mystical Elf is more generically useful given that its stunning ability affects monsters of all levels, though only as a wall that pins a monster in place for a bigger monster or pincer attack setup. I think Dark Eye's effect should have encapsulated monsters of level 5 and 6, since this would have made it able to pin down an opponent's Blue Eyes White Dragon in exchange for stacking itself. Now we move on to the far-reaching effect monsters. These include Feral Imp, a level 4 monster with 1800 attack and 1900 defense, who can attack up to 2 spaces ahead, and the Gate Guardian, a level 5 monster with 2300 attack and 2500 defense, which can attack up to 3 spaces ahead. These are the monsters that you want to protect with your walls while they set up combination attacks. The highest base stat present in the Labyrinth battle game is the Blue Eyes White Dragon's 3000 attack points, ignoring a possibly well-fed Hercules Beetle or Celtic Swordsman, of course. What this means is that any monster that has 1500 attack points being aided by another monster that has at least 600 attack points will always be able to soundly win combat against any opposing monster. And wouldn't you know it, both of these cards have the necessary combat stats and then some. Both of these cards are worth their weight in gold, though it's necessary to point out that running both would spend almost half of your available deck space on the maximum reach engine. Is that good? I'm not entirely sure. And finally, we have the last 3 effect monsters with effects unique exclusively to them. We have Karibo, a level 2 monster with 1500 attack and 1800 defense, who has the effect text, when it attacks an enemy, the enemy's attack decreases by 500 points permanently, even if it wins. Time Magician, a level 3 monster with 1000 attack and 500 defense, who has the effect text, once per game, Time Magician can warp to any location. And finally, Dragon Capture Jar, a level 5 monster with 1200 attack and 1400 defense, who has the effect text, if it attacks or is attacked by a dragon, that dragon is removed from the game. Time Magician may just be the most important monster in the entire format, given the combination attack combat rules of the Labyrinth battle game. In exchange for 15% of your deck space and a monster within 900 attack points of any of your opponent's monsters' most important combat stat, you get guaranteed victory once. In a mode where the maximum amount of monsters that someone can bring is 7, and often will be a number even lower than that, if they happen to pick monsters that you desperately want to beat over anyway, Time Magician ekes out its niche as the all-time best card here, standing side by side with Blue Eyes White Dragon of all things. Although it does become borderline useless on its own once its ability is used up, being unable to defend against or attack anything successfully on its own. Karibo functions as what I like to call a 2-layer trap, backing up a defensive wall or combat immunity monster and punishing anything that tries to punch through by permanently reducing its attack points. Karibo is also really good at poking defensive walls with high attack points like Dark Magician, since it can enter combat with them for no penalty and repeatedly charm them into submission until they pose little to no threat at all. Good luck making this happen without your opponent catching on though, since Karibo is slow as hell with only 2 movement per turn. Also, just like Darkeye, the effect only activates when it attacks and not when combat takes place regardless, making it more like the world's biggest target for removal over anything else. Your mileage here may vary, and I'd love to see some sort of online version of this format that's easily accessible for everyone to play, like Pokemon Showdown, but for this format. Currently, the best way to play this is with Tabletop Simulator, which is obviously a community effort and can be a little unwieldy to play at times. Of significant note is a Dragon Capture Jar, a complete counter to any and all dragon monsters in the game, of which there are 5. Blackland Fire Dragon, Winged Dragon Guardian of the Fortress, Curse of Dragon, Red Eyes Black Dragon, and Blue Eyes White Dragon, which is roughly 1/4 of the monster lineup. Given its high movement abilities, it's quite capable of pinning down opposing dragons and removing them from the game without as much as a counterattack, though it does require an intense amount of strategic usage as its combat statistics are lacking in every single way. It also costs quite a lot of deck space to use, so if you happen to bring it and don't spot a single dragon monster on your opponent's monster lineup, then you're in for a rough game. Alright, so here's a few pre-made teams that I came up with so you don't have to put a ton of thought into your first couple of times playing if you decide to try this game out with your friends. I also added taglines to each one that briefly go over the game plan so you can sort of pilot them well from the get-go. We have Pure Power. Throw caution to the wind and spend every turn closing in on your opponent with the strongest monsters in the game. This includes Blue Eyes White Dragon, Red Eyes Black Dragon, Summon Skull, and Time Magician. We have Pure Defense. Utilize different combat immune creatures alongside your long-range pokers to create pincer attacks that force your opponent to think harder about their approach. With this, we have Gust, Brain Slime, Gimmick, Barrel Imp, Gate Guardian, and Time Magician. Balance is key. Sometimes having no weaknesses is more important than having a ton of strengths. Summon Skull, Mystical Elf, Karibo, Dragon Capture Jar, Time Magician, and Gust. Dragon Bonanza, Dragon Capture Jar who? Blackland Fire Dragon, Winged Dragon Guardian of the Fortress, Curse of Dragon, Gaia the Fierce Knight, and Karibo. Full roster, outlast your opponent with careful play and 1-for-1 trades. Celtic Swordsman, Mystical Elf, Brain Slime, Karibo, Time Magician, Gust, Darkeye. The worst generation. Why would you do this? Hercules Beetle, Curse of Dragon, Pillar Needle, Darkeye, Winged Dragon, Guardian of the Fortress. Give me more 4s. Level 4 specialization with a particular hatred for Gust. Gust, Karibo, Celtic Swordsman, Barrel Imp, Blackland Fire Dragon, Winged Dragon, Guardian of the Fortress. 5's a Vibe, a level 5 specialization with a particular hatred for Brain Slime. Brain Slime, Karibo, Dark Magician, Dragon Capture Jar, Gate Guardian. So, I'll bet you're wondering how all of this does in practice. I mean, we could talk about theoretical gameplay all we want, but not everyone has the spare income to purchase an old Yu-Gi-Oh manga, cut out the relevant pages, and then spend half a printer's worth of resources on an obscure game that's probably never even been playtested. Luckily, you're still in the presence of YouTube's #1 yapper, so I did all of the hard work for you. I cut out the pages, since attempting to crush the manga directly into the printer's scanner made for some pretty unsightly printings, laminated every single one of the pages, and then cut out 2 sets of the playing cards to create a viable, real-world board game. And, well, okay, I think I did something wrong. The cards are way too big for the actual game board, and if I make them any smaller, then the text might be too illegible to read. The tabletop simulator mod that I use to feel out how the game plays, created by Steam user Cube, uses pieces with each card's artwork attached to them, but I don't think the average household has these sorts of things on hand in order to make this field size work. Also, the description of this mod reads, almost completely untested and very bare bones, which I think describes Labyrinth Battle as a whole pretty well. The game board was printed by inserting both cutout manga panels featuring the dungeon with the correct sides attached, which you can see with this uneven seam right here. Not the end of the world, but definitely not usable unless you have some way of interpreting where each monster is on the game board without using the actual cutout cards themselves, which is kind of annoying since after you move each piece, you need to visually place them in either attack or defense mode. I guess you could verbally say, I move this piece and place it in attack or defense mode. But with a game like this, you are without a doubt going to forget which mode each card is in unless A, you write everything down, or B, just assume whatever each card's best combat stat is what position they are currently placed in. You can simply play on the manga pages themselves, but the result would remain the same. It's simply too small to fit the cards. Also, the board chunks being separated is driving my autism insane. I do not like how this looks. I tried printing each individual side out on its own piece of paper, setting my printer to fill page, which it definitely gave me a bigger game board to work with, but now each side isn't connected without some sort of binding agent like tape or glue. You're definitely going to want to have these board chunks connected so that the whole board doesn't get knocked around when one player slides their cards around on the playing field. The cards themselves are still a little large for the game board, and it's debatable if this is acceptable enough for a valid play session, given that cards bordering each other would have to layer on top of or below each other pretty awkwardly. You could use Scrabble pieces to denote which monster is in the game, and even rotate the pieces to specify attack or defense mode, but now we're getting into more effort than it's worth territory here. I would definitely recommend the tabletop simulator mod created by Lunith, which shows just how large the game board actually needs to be in order to perfectly fit the playing cards on them as intended, which is comically so large that the game board itself is wider than the table that is actually being played on. So, what about the rules? Well, I got a couple of my sexiest friends together to test out how this game plays in reality, and it's fine. Very bare bones, and as you'd expect, Blue Eyes White Dragon is literally the most broken card in the game. High movement, instant win in single combat besides against Dragon Capture Jar specifically, and most map skirmishes ended up just being both opponents who turtled every single one of their creatures directly in the middle of the map, and then constantly went for one-for-one trades until one side became unable to contest any of their opponent's monsters. Setting up defenses takes way too long, since most defensive monsters have low movement, and most high-attack vanilla creatures felt incredibly strong and never really needed to worry about losing to a pincher attack if they just ended up killing everything in one hit anyway. Also, something that felt incredibly trivial was the rule that requires every monster to move exactly as many spaces as they had stars, since there are so many places on the map where each card can simply waste their extra movement by running around in circles in order to end up next to their attack targets. Moving only up to 3 monsters per turn felt very lopsided if one of the players simply built their deck with only a few monsters in mind, while the other tried to build a full roster of dudes to try and outlast their opponent. Weaker monsters just don't provide as much value as the stronger ones do. The rule about pincher attacks is also worded in a way that makes it quite frustrating to actually take advantage of in practice, given that it specifically requires attacking monsters to be on separate sides of the monster that they wish to attack in order to group their attack points together. This makes the shield and spear playstyle, which I brainstormed in the full defense pre-built team, completely useless, since you'd think a Gate Guardian and Feral Imp being able to attack a monster from range would make it so that you can protect them with a combat immune or bulky monster in front front of them, and then both monsters attack at the same time for the combat victory. But that doesn't work according to this rule because both of your monsters are attacking from the same direction. This could very much be a translation error, but as I've mentioned before, and as you can probably tell, I do not speak or read Japanese. I'm very sorry. Ohio! Also, there's a fair few rules completely missing that I had to headcanon myself while I watched and coached my friends playing against each other. I didn't want to play the game myself against someone who didn't know anything about what they were doing, given how much research I've put into this subject. So I made 2 completely uninitiated players go head-to-head in order to get as clean of an experience as possible. Battles are stated to be able to take place once your card stops on a space next to an opponent's monster. But what about if they are already right next to them? Can a monster begin their turn by attacking, and then after it wins combat, use its movement to move somewhere else on the board? If a monster attacks, is that considered moving a monster? Or can you attack with a monster that starts its turn bordering an opponent's monster and then move 3 different cards, since the monster that just battled never ended up actually using its movement at all? Like I said before, one tactic that ended up happening a lot was turtling and waiting for your opponent to initiate combat in order to pinch or attack them or be able to overwhelm their now out of position monsters with a huge combination of battles. So with that being said, you can move up to 3 monsters per turn, but is there a limit on how few moves that you were able to do? I had to say, if you end 3 turns without moving a card, you forfeit the match in order to break a stalemate. But that's a rule that I made up. And it seems that the creator of the Labyrinth battle game didn't take into account that a player could simply take up an impressive defensive position and then simply not ever move and force your opponent to take the initiative at a glaring deficit. It's kind of like how old Fire Emblem games worked. You simply move all of your guys as a ball of death across the map and take on only a few opponents at a time, overwhelming them in the process by outnumbering them with human wave tactics. Also, playing this game over a simulator is a tall ask, given that the entire point of this game is supposed to be its ease of access. Tabletop Simulator is literally $20 per copy, and you can buy a completely viable Yu-Gi-Oh deck with that money instead of jumping through hoops to play a game that might not even have been playtested before it got mass-produced and packed in at the back of a manga novel. I had to purchase an entirely new thing of ink for my printer in order to trial print a few pages while figuring out card and game board sizes, alongside whether I needed to actually cut the manga pages out or not, which ended up taking 2/3 of black ink, which in this day and age is an incredibly tall ask for families struggling financially, where every single purchase needs to be worth it in order to require all of these resources. I'm not saying that this was the current case back in the day when this was printed, nor do I think that the blame of such things falls upon a manga author literally attempting to give out a free game to the readers that they cherish so deeply. That falls on the people responsible for creating a world where low-income families are even a thing, instead of everyone being able to provide for their families and keep their heads above water without sacrificing significant portions of their lifespans to uncaring and unfeeling organizations and corporations. Maybe we should just create a world where we can all have fun printing out a cute little untested card game to fill up an afternoon without having to worry about whether it's financially wise to do so or not. What was I talking about? Oh yeah. Should you play the Duel Monsters Labyrinth battle game from Duelist Manga 4? I don't know. Maybe if what you saw today in this little video made you want to give it a go for yourself, I think you should. It's a little piece in the grander puzzle that makes Yu-Gi-Oh! Such an experimental and joyful series filled with ideas and fun and friendship. And isn't that why we play games in the first place? Anyway, that'll do it for today's video. God, it feels good to actually finish a script after all of this time. I'm literally constantly fishing for a smaller topic to make shorter videos, but I always end up wanting to cover things so deeply that it ends up absolutely wrecking my upload schedule. Thank you for your patience in all of this. Many videos are in the works currently. You have my word on that. A huge thank you to all of my new patrons that have decided to support me since the last video. I've gotten so many nice comments and new members in my Discord. It genuinely puts puts such a huge smile on my face. Well, like I always say at the end of these things, please consider supporting me on Patreon or by becoming a channel member. You can get your name at the beginning of every video and know that your money is going towards a good cause, keeping a roof over my head and my stomach full while I continue working hard to create content for y'all's enjoyment. I also recently refurbished my Ko-fi, so if you happen to not want to have a support subscription and instead simply want to throw some cash my way, consider buying me a coffee over there or sending me a super thanks over here on YouTube. As I've said before, I lost my job a few months ago and have been burning through my savings, pushing my channel as hard as I can, and I would really love to do this full time. Your support would literally help me fulfill my dream of becoming YouTube's #1 yapper. Subscribe to the channel if you're new, leave a like on the video, and comment something down below to let me know that you love listening to this Robo Bunny girl talk, because you know I love talking. Join the Discord to chat with others like yourselves, and I will see you guys next time. Love you lots. Bye-bye.